The mistress signed the bill before dessert, as if a woman could pay for another woman's humiliation and call it elegance. At the Morrow room in Manhattan, the candles were low, the piano was soft, and every polished glass on the long private table reflected a version of the evening Grant Whittaker wanted the world to believe. A clean ending, a civilized separation, a celebration of new beginnings. That was what he called it when he invited 12 friends, 3 business partners, and the woman who had replaced his wife to a divorce party inside one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. Evelyn Harper sat near the far end of the table in a simple black dress, her posture straight, her hands resting lightly beside a glass of sparkling water she had barely touched. She had not wanted to come, but the invitation had arrived through Grant's assistant with a note written in his careful, public voice. It would be better if we showed everyone there are no hard feelings. No hard feelings. As if 10 years of marriage could be folded into a linen napkin and placed beside the salad fork. As if betrayal became tasteful when served under candlelight. Across the table, Sienna Blake leaned toward Grant in a champagne-colored dress that shimmered whenever she moved, her laughter rising above the piano just enough to remind everyone who now held his attention. She sat in the chair Evelyn used to sit in during anniversaries, investor dinners, and quiet evenings when Grant still looked at his wife as if gratitude had weight. Now his hand rested near Sienna's glass, not touching it, but close enough to make the message clear. Evelyn watched the motion, then looked down at the white napkin in her lap. The Morrow crest was embroidered in silver thread near the corner, a small laurel around the letter M. Her thumb brushed over it once, carefully, before she folded the napkin back into place. The waiter cleared the last dinner plates with quiet precision. Roasted sea bass, truffle risotto, heirloom carrots glazed until they shone like amber. No one spoke of the food with much sincerity. They spoke around Evelyn instead, lowering their voices when they mentioned real estate, travel, the Hamptons, Aspen, anything that belonged to the life Grant intended to keep while asking her to leave quietly. Then Sienna reached for Grant's gold pen. The waiter had placed the leather bill folder near Grant by mistake, or perhaps because he assumed the man at the center of the table controlled the evening. Sienna smiled, opened it before dessert arrived, and signed her name with a slow flourish. The room seemed to notice all at once. Forks paused. A wineglass stopped halfway to someone's mouth. Grant looked at Sienna, then at Evelyn, and did nothing. Sienna closed the folder and slid it toward the waiter with 2 fingers. "Tonight is on me," she said brightly. "Freedom should be paid for by the woman who knows what to do with it." A few people laughed too softly. One of Grant's partners looked down at his cufflinks. Evelyn felt the sentence enter her chest and settle there, cold and exact. Not because of the money. Never because of the money. Because Sienna was not paying for dinner. She was signing herself into Evelyn's place, turning the end of a marriage into a receipt and asking the room to applaud the transaction. Grant leaned closer, his voice low enough to sound private, but clear enough to wound. "Let us keep this elegant, Evelyn." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw no shame in his face, only discomfort that she was still present enough to make cruelty visible. Before she could answer, the waiter hesitated beside the table. His eyes moved toward the arched doorway leading to the kitchen. There, beneath the warm shadow of the hall, Julian Moreau had appeared. The owner of the restaurant stood perfectly still, watching the signed bill in the waiter's hand, then looking past Grant and Sienna to the woman in the black dress at the end of the table. Before Julian Moreau ever stood in that arched doorway watching a bill become a weapon, Evelyn Harper had spent years teaching Grant Whittaker how not to embarrass himself in rooms exactly like this one. When they first married, Grant had ambition sharp enough to cut through any door, but not enough grace to remain welcome once he entered. He knew how to close a deal, how to read a balance sheet, how to speak in numbers that made older men nod, but he did not know how to listen when a waiter described the wine, how to thank a host without sounding impatient, or how to notice when silence at a table meant discomfort rather than agreement. Evelyn noticed everything. She had been raised by a mother who believed manners were not decoration, but evidence of whether a person understood the dignity of others. Margaret Harper used to say that anyone could buy a tailored suit, but not everyone could stand inside one without making the room smaller. Evelyn carried that lesson into her marriage the way some women carried heirloom jewelry, quietly, carefully, and without asking to be admired for it. In the early years, she rewrote Grant's thank you notes after investor dinners because his first drafts sounded like invoices. She reminded him to learn the names of assistants, drivers, servers, and spouses, not because they could do anything for him, but because they were people and deserved to be seen. She chose the flowers for hospital rooms when a partner's wife was ill. She remembered which client avoided shellfish, which board member had lost a son, which donor cared more about scholarships than plaques. Grant called her extraordinary then. He said it while leaning against their kitchen counter in shirt sleeves, watching her seal envelopes at midnight. He said he did not know how she made everyone feel important. She had smiled at the time and told him it was not difficult if he stopped treating people as steps. For a while, he seemed to learn. He held doors without checking who was watching. He asked the busboy at their favorite bistro about night school. He sent flowers when Evelyn's mother passed, not from an assistant, but in his own handwriting, and she had believed grief had made them gentler together. Success arrived slowly, then all at once. The apartments grew higher, the tables longer, the wine older, the guest lists more strategic. Grant's suits became better cut. His watches became quieter and more expensive. His voice developed the calm authority of a man used to being expected, but the kindness Evelyn had helped polish into him began to thin at the edges. He kept the gestures that photographed well and discarded the reasons behind them. He remembered names when they mattered to business. He sent flowers when condolences could strengthen alliances. He thanked staff when guests were watching. The man Evelyn had taught to honor a room became a man who used rooms. The first time he brought Sienna Blake to a charity reception, he introduced her as a consultant with a smile too rehearsed to be harmless. Sienna laughed at his stories before he finished them and touched his sleeve when important people looked over. Evelyn saw the future in that touch before Grant admitted the present. He did not confess so much as reframe. He said the marriage had become quiet. He said they had grown into different versions of themselves. He said Sienna understood the life he was building. Evelyn listened from the opposite end of their dining table, the one she had chosen because it could seat 12 without making anyone feel far away, and realized Grant had mistaken her patience for permission to replace her gently. Now, at the Moreau room, beneath candles and piano notes, she watched Sienna sit in the chair Evelyn had once occupied beside him, holding the gold pen like a key. The guests saw a glamorous woman paying a bill. Evelyn saw the final lesson Grant had failed to learn. A person could enter an elegant room, know which fork to use, pronounce the wine correctly, and still reveal a poverty no money could hide. Julian Moreau remained by the kitchen arch, his gaze fixed on Evelyn, and the memory of every room she had once helped Grant survive settled around her like a dark, expensive coat. Sienna noticed Julian Moreau before anyone else understood why his stillness mattered. She saw the owner near the kitchen arch, watching the bill folder in the waiter's hand, and mistook his attention for approval. That was the thing about people who learned confidence without humility. They often confused every gaze with admiration. She leaned back beside Grant, the champagne silk of her dress catching the candlelight, and lifted her glass as if the evening had always belonged to her. "Since dessert is coming," she said, bright enough for the whole table, "I think we should toast before the night becomes too sentimental." Evelyn kept her hands still near her untouched sparkling water. Around the table, guests shifted with the nervous obedience of people trapped between cruelty and manners. Grant smiled faintly, not because the moment was kind, but because Sienna knew how to make discomfort look like sophistication. "To new beginnings," Sienna continued, turning her glass toward Grant. "Some women are chapters. Others are the sequel." A few people laughed, too quickly, too carefully. One woman at the far side of the table lowered her eyes. A man from Grant's investment firm looked toward Evelyn, then away, as if shame might become contagious if he held eye contact for too long. Evelyn felt the words pass over her skin with the chill of a door left open in winter. Chapter. Sequel. As if a decade of loyalty, labor, grief, patience, and quiet rescue could be reduced to narrative order. As if Sienna had not entered near the end of a story already hollowed out by Grant's choices. Grant touched the stem of his glass, but did not raise it all the way. "Let us not make it dramatic," he said, looking at Evelyn instead of Sienna. There it was again, the old arrangement. Someone else cut, and Evelyn was expected not to bleed where anyone could see. She looked at him across the candlelit table and remembered every dinner where she had saved him from saying the wrong thing. Every thank you note she had rewritten, every host she had softened after Grant forgot a detail that mattered. Now he sat beneath the same elegance she had taught him to respect, asking her to protect him from the ugliness he had brought into it. Sienna reached for the bill folder again, tapping one manicured finger against the leather cover. "I already signed," she said lightly, "so no one needs to worry about awkward little leftovers." Her eyes moved to Evelyn on the word leftovers. The insult was small enough to deny and sharp enough to keep. Evelyn did not answer. She unfolded the napkin in her lap and looked again at the silver Moreau crest. The laurel around the letter M had been stitched with the kind of care people only noticed when something went wrong. Years ago, that same crest had appeared on a letter sent to the Harper Table Foundation, printed on paper too expensive for a restaurant that was quietly running out of money. Evelyn remembered holding that letter in her mother's old office, reading Julian Moreau's careful words about payroll, rent, suppliers, and a community meal program in Queens he refused to abandon even while his dining room sat half empty through a brutal winter. She had remembered her mother saying that the best tables were not the ones where rich people were seen, but the ones where hungry people were fed with dignity. So Evelyn had helped. Quietly, thoroughly, without putting her name on the menu, the wall, or the press release. Now Sienna sat in that saved room, using its candlelight to humiliate the woman who had kept it alive. The waiter still had not moved. Julian finally stepped forward from the archway, his dark suit perfectly pressed, his expression formal enough to silence the nearest conversations. Grant noticed him and straightened, ready to be recognized as the man paying for the evening. Sienna smiled, as if expecting gratitude for her signature. But Julian walked past both of them. His eyes found Evelyn at the end of the table, and with the smallest bow of his head, he made the room understand that the person of honor had been sitting quietly in the place everyone else had mistaken for exile. Long before Julian Moreau crossed that dining room with the signed bill in his hand, the Moreau room had nearly disappeared behind unpaid invoices, empty reservation books, and the kind of winter that made even beautiful places feel abandoned. Evelyn remembered the first time she read his letter because it had arrived 3 weeks after her mother's funeral, when the Harper townhouse still smelled of lilies, polished wood, and grief no one knew how to move. Margaret Harper had not left her daughter a fortune with instructions to shine. She had left a foundation, a set of handwritten notes, and one sentence underlined twice in blue ink. Never let money become louder than mercy. The Harper Table Foundation had begun as Margaret's private promise to. Small restaurants, immigrant kitchens, neighborhood bakeries, culinary students, and community meal programs that fed people without making them feel poor. She believed the table was one of the last places where dignity could be restored without announcement. Evelyn had grown up watching her mother write checks quietly, visit kitchens through back doors, ask line cooks about their children, and remember the names of dishwashers before remembering the names of donors. So when Julian's letter arrived, Evelyn recognized the kind of pride hidden between the lines. He did not ask to be rescued. He asked for time. The Moreau room had been his father's dream before it became his burden, a Manhattan restaurant built on French technique, American patience, and a belief that dinner could still feel like ceremony without becoming performance. Then rent rose, suppliers tightened credit, wealthy guests chased newer rooms, and the community supper program Julian refused to close began draining what little money remained. Evelyn visited on a rainy Tuesday afternoon when the dining room was empty and chairs sat upside down on white tablecloths. Julian did not know who she was at first. He only knew a woman in a dark coat had arrived without cameras, without an assistant, and without asking for the best table. He served her coffee in the closed restaurant while the kitchen staff moved quietly behind swinging doors. She saw everything Grant would never have noticed: the patched leather on the host's stand, the young pastry cook wrapping leftover bread for the Queen's meal program, the old photograph of Julian's parents near the bar, the silver Moreau crest embroidered into napkins that had been washed so many times the threads had softened but not failed. Julian showed her the books with embarrassment folded into every page. Payroll was 2 weeks late. The landlord had issued a final notice. The program feeding families in Queens would be cut by Friday if he did not find money. Evelyn listened without interrupting. She thought of her mother's hands folding napkins at charity dinners because she never asked anyone else to do what she considered beneath herself. Then Evelyn signed the first grant before leaving the restaurant. More followed. A bridge loan, payroll support, supplier payments, a new community kitchen partnership. She required no public announcement, no plaque, no donor dinner. She only asked that the staff remain employed and that the Queen's meals continue. Julian had tried to put her name somewhere, anywhere, but Evelyn refused. My mother used to say gratitude is not smaller when it is private, she told him. From that winter forward, the Moreau room lived. Its candles returned. Its piano returned. Its tables filled again with people who believed they had discovered elegance, never knowing a quiet woman had protected it before it became fashionable to admire. Now, in that same room, the saved candles burned over Grant's divorce party, and Sienna's signature rested on a bill she thought made her powerful. Evelyn looked at Julian's small bow and felt the past step into the present, not loudly, but with the steady confidence of a door finally opening from the correct side. Julian Moreau had recognized Evelyn before he recognized the cruelty around her. At first, it was only the stillness. The woman at the end of the table sat with the quiet composure of someone who had learned to let a room reveal itself before offering it anything. Then he saw the way her thumb rested near the silver crest on the napkin, not touching it like a guest admiring decoration, but like someone remembering the cost of keeping it there. Evelyn Harper. The name came to him with the smell of rain on an empty Tuesday afternoon, with the sound of chairs stacked on white tablecloths, with the shame of showing a stranger his failing books because pride had become less important than payroll. He had not seen her in person for almost 4 years. She had refused invitations, declined public gratitude, and sent every holiday card to the staff instead of to him alone. Yet the room she saved still carried her absence the way old stone carried warmth after sunset. Now she was sitting in that same room while Grant Whitaker used candlelight to make betrayal look tasteful, and Sienna Blake used a sign bill to turn humiliation into ceremony. Julian looked at the waiter beside him, a young man named Aaron whose face had gone pale beneath professional calm. The leather bill folder trembled slightly in Aaron's hand, not enough for the table to notice, but enough for Julian to see. "Do not process that payment," Julian said quietly. Aaron looked relieved and frightened at once. "Yes, Mr. Moreau." From the kitchen behind them came the soft rhythm of service, spoons touching porcelain, the pastry chef lowering glossy lemon tarts onto chilled plates, the scent of brown butter and citrus moving through the warm air. Dessert was ready. 12 plates for Grant's guests, one extra tasting portion because Julian always sent something small to a table after a private event. He had approved the menu himself that morning without knowing the purpose of the dinner. The reservation had come through Grant's assistant as a private celebration, high profile, full buyout of the back dining room, premium wine pairing, no press. Julian had not liked the phrase celebration once he saw Evelyn seated alone at the end, but restaurants often taught owners to wait before judging the occasion. Now there was nothing left to wait for. He turned toward the pastry station. "Hold dessert." The pastry chef looked up. "All of it, all of it." The kitchen slowed in the way a good kitchen did when something invisible changed. No one asked loudly. They knew Julian's voice. They knew when service became more than service. He took the bill folder from Aaron and opened it under the small brass lamp near the service stand. Sienna Blake's signature curved across the receipt with decorative confidence, written beneath a total large enough to make some guests feel important and most workers think about rent. Julian stared at it, not because the money mattered, but because the signature did. It was a name placed over a debt she did not understand, inside a room she had not helped preserve, at a table where she had mistaken access for worth. Grant's name appeared on the reservation. Sienna's signature appeared on the bill. But the foundation that kept the staff employed through winter, the grant that preserved the Queen's meal program, the quiet hand that refused a plaque, all of it belonged to the woman being asked to swallow humiliation with sparkling water. Julian closed the folder. In the dining room, Sienna was still smiling, speaking to Grant's guests as if she had saved the evening by paying for it. Grant leaned back with the satisfaction of a man who believed the hardest part was over. Evelyn remained still, though Julian saw the slight brightness in her eyes. Not weakness. Grief held behind discipline. He stepped into his office for less than a minute, opened the locked drawer where he kept letters that mattered more than contracts, and removed the cream envelope Evelyn had sent after the final foundation payment cleared. Her note was short, written in dark blue ink. Please keep feeding people with dignity. My mother would have liked this room. Julian folded the letter into his inside jacket pocket, then returned to the dining room, carrying the signed bill. The piano seemed softer now. The candles seemed less decorative and more watchful. As he approached the table, Grant straightened, expecting apology for the delayed dessert. Sienna lifted her chin, expecting praise for the payment. Julian stopped beside the white linen table and placed one hand gently over the leather folder. He did not look at either of them first. He looked at Evelyn, and the whole table began to understand that dessert was not late by accident. The room did not stop all at once. It softened in layers. First the piano quieted, then the silverware, then the careful laughter that had been keeping Grant's divorce party from sounding as cruel as it was. Julian Moreau stood beside the table with the signed bill beneath his hand, and the candlelight caught the white edge of the receipt like a blade made of paper. Grant looked up first, his face arranged into the mild impatience of a man accustomed to service correcting itself around him. "Julian," he said, with a polished smile meant to remind everyone they were in a room where he belonged. "Is there a problem with the card?" Sienna smiled before Julian could answer. "I hope not," she said lightly, turning toward the guests. "I would hate for dessert to wait because of something so ordinary." "Hey." Few people tried to laugh, but the sound came out thin. Evelyn sat at the far end of the table, her black dress almost disappearing into the shadows beyond the candles, except for her face, still and pale beneath the warm light. She had folded her napkin with such care that the Moreau crest rested exactly at the top, silver thread catching against white linen. Julian saw it and felt the note in his jacket pocket like a second heartbeat. "Please keep feeding people with dignity." He looked at Sienna then, not unkindly, but without giving her the admiration she expected. "The card is not the issue, Miss Blake." Sienna's smile tightened by one careful degree. "Then what is?" Grant shifted beside her. "I am sure this can be handled away from the table." Julian did not move. "Ordinarily, yes." The word ordinarily landed with quiet weight. Around the table, one of Grant's partners set his wineglass down. A woman near the center leaned back, eyes moving from the bill to Evelyn, then to Julian. The private dining room seemed to grow smaller, the velvet walls holding every breath. Sienna touched the gold pin near her plate as if it could still prove something. "I signed the bill," she said. "If the restaurant needs authorization, you have it." Julian placed the bill folder flat on the table and turned it slightly so the signature faced upward. He did not raise his voice. "That is exactly why dessert has been held." Grant's smile vanished for a second before he rebuilt it. "Held?" "Yes," Julian said. "The final course will not be served until this payment is corrected." Sienna blinked, then laughed softly, the way she had laughed when calling Evelyn a chapter. "Corrected? I paid for the evening." Julian's eyes moved toward Evelyn, and something in his expression changed from hospitality to reverence. "No," he said. "You attempted to turn the evening into a receipt for someone else's humiliation." The table went silent. Evelyn's fingers tightened once against the edge of her napkin, then relaxed. Grant leaned forward, his voice lower now. "Careful, Julian." The owner looked at him with the calm of a man who had survived worse things than rich embarrassment. "I am being very careful, Mr. Whitaker. That is why I will say this before dessert, before another toast, and before this room is asked to pretend not to understand what happened here." Sienna's face flushed beneath the candlelight. "This is absurd. She is not paying. I am." Julian lifted the leather folder and closed it with a soft sound. "The Moreau room does not accept payment used to disgrace the woman who kept this restaurant alive." For a moment, no one moved. The words seemed to travel to the walls, to the silver crest on the napkins, to the kitchen beyond the arch where staff stood listening in stunned silence. Grant looked at Evelyn then, not with apology, but with sudden calculation. Sienna turned toward him, waiting for an explanation he did not have. Evelyn remained seated, the smallest shine in her eyes, her dignity unbroken, while the dessert no one had tasted became the first thing that night to refuse the lie. Grant rose from his chair slowly, the way men rose when they believed height could restore authority. The candlelight moved across his cuff links, his white shirt, the expensive calm he had worn into the room like armor, but nothing about him looked effortless now. "Julian," he said, keeping his voice smooth for the guests. "This is a private dinner. Whatever misunderstanding you think has occurred, I suggest we discuss it somewhere else." Julian Moreau did not step back. The leather bill folder remained closed beneath his hand, no longer an object of service, but evidence. "It became less private when the payment was used as part of the insult," he said. Sienna's face sharpened. "Insult? I signed a bill. That is all." Evelyn watched her from the far end of the table, seeing how carefully Sienna tried to shrink the cruelty now that someone respectable had named it. A moment earlier, Sienna had signed with flourish, toasted freedom, called Evelyn a chapter, and waited for the room to laugh. Now she wanted the act to become ordinary again, just ink on paper, just a woman paying for dinner. Julian looked at her with a politeness so complete it felt final. "A bill can be ordinary," he said. This one was not. The guests were silent now. The piano had stopped completely, leaving only the low sounds of the restaurant beyond the private room. A spoon against porcelain, a chair moved gently across the floor, the distant murmur of people who did not know that one table had forgotten how to breathe. Grant placed one hand on the edge of the table. "Evelyn does not need defending." That was the first thing he had said all night that almost made her smile. Not because it was true, but because it revealed how little he understood. Julian turned toward Evelyn then, and his expression softened with a respect that made several people glance at her differently. "No," he said. "She does not need defending. This room does." Sienna laughed once, but it had no light in it. "From what exactly?" Julian picked up the signed receipt and held it just high enough for everyone to see her name. "From being used to celebrate the public humiliation of a woman to whom this restaurant owes gratitude." Grant's face tightened. "Careful." "I am," Julian replied. "Care is the only reason I did not allow dessert to leave the kitchen." Evelyn lowered her gaze for a second, and in that pause, she could almost smell the lemon tarts waiting behind the swinging doors, bright and delicate, prepared for a table that had turned bitter before the final course. Her mother had loved lemon desserts. She used to say they were proof that sweetness meant more when it did not hide the sharpness. Sienna pushed her chair back slightly. "This is ridiculous. If the restaurant does not want my payment, charge Grant. Or charge her. I do not care." The sentence fell harder than she intended. Her eyes flicked toward Evelyn on the word her, and the room heard it. Not Mrs. Whitaker. Not Evelyn. Her. A woman reduced to an inconvenience at her own ending. Julian placed the receipt back in the folder, this time facing down. "The Moreau room will not charge Mrs. Whitaker for this evening." Sienna stared at him. "She did not pay. She has paid enough." The words were quiet, but they moved through the room like a curtain opening. Grant's partners looked at one another. The woman near the center of the table pressed her napkin against her lap, no longer able to pretend she had not understood. Grant took a breath as if preparing another polished correction, but Evelyn spoke first. "Julian," she said softly. It was not a plea. It was a boundary, gentle but clear. He looked at her, and for a moment the entire table saw the history between them without knowing its shape. Gratitude. Recognition. A debt that had never been financial. Julian gave her a small nod, as if asking forgiveness for revealing what she had chosen to keep private. Then he turned back to the table. "Before dessert is served," he said, "there is something everyone here should know about the woman you allowed to sit alone at the end of this table." Julian did not speak quickly. He let the silence settle first, because truth deserved a room that could hear it. The private dining room at the Moreau room seemed to hold its breath around him, the candles trembling in their glass holders, the white plates cleared but not replaced, the folded napkins shining with the silver crest Evelyn had once protected from disappearing. Grant remained standing, one hand still on the table, his expression caught between anger and calculation. Sienna sat very still now, the gold pin beside her plate no longer looking like a symbol of victory, only an object she had used without understanding the table beneath it. Julian reached into his inside jacket pocket and removed a cream envelope, worn slightly at the edges from being kept, unfolded, and read more times than paper was meant to survive. 4 winters ago, he said, this restaurant was 48 hours from closing. The words changed the air. Several guests looked toward the walls, the velvet curtains, the brass sconces, the polished floor, as if seeing the room not as a fashionable address, but as something that had almost become a memory. Our staff had gone 2 weeks without certainty. Our suppliers were waiting. Our landlord had issued a final notice. And our community supper program in Queens was going to end on a Friday night, with families already expecting meals. Evelyn lowered her eyes, not from shame, but from the old discomfort of being named for something she had chosen to do quietly. Julian looked at her with a softness that did not ask permission anymore, because he understood that the insult had already made privacy impossible. Then the Harper Table Foundation called. Grant's face shifted. The name Harper entered the room like a key turning in a lock he had not known existed. Sienna looked at him, waiting for recognition, but he offered none. Julian continued. The foundation covered payroll. It paid suppliers. It helped us rebuild our community kitchen partnership. It kept every employee in this building working, and it kept those Queens meals going until the restaurant could stand on its own again. The table was completely silent now. No one looked at Sienna's signature. They looked at Evelyn. The woman Grant had seated at the far end. The woman Sienna had called a chapter. The woman who had been expected to sit quietly while her own dignity was dressed up as entertainment. Julian held up the envelope carefully. After the final payment cleared, Mrs. Evelyn Harper sent me this note. I have kept it in my office ever since. He opened it and read only one line, his voice low enough to make everyone lean closer. Please keep feeding people with dignity. My mother would have liked this room. The words landed harder than applause could have. A woman near the center of the table covered her mouth with one hand. Grant slowly sat down, not because anyone asked him to, but because standing had stopped making him look powerful. Sienna's face lost its color beneath the candlelight. For the first time, she seemed to understand that the chair she had claimed, the dinner she had signed for, the room she had used to celebrate replacing Evelyn, had been kept alive by the very woman she had tried to erase. Julian placed the note beside the closed bill folder. So no, he said, turning toward Sienna without cruelty. We will not accept this payment as written. And we will not charge Mrs. Whitaker for a humiliation staged inside a room she saved. Grant looked at Evelyn then, truly looked, perhaps searching for anger because anger would have made him feel less small. But Evelyn gave him none. She only unfolded her napkin, touched the silver crest once, and placed it neatly beside her plate. Her eyes shone, but her voice was steady when she finally spoke. My mother believed a table should make people feel less alone. Julian bowed his head. Around them, the guests sat in the warm glow of a room that had just changed owners in their minds, though not by contract, not by money, and not by a signature on a bill. It changed because everyone finally understood who had paid the real cost of keeping elegance alive. The dessert came after Evelyn stood. Not before, not during the applause that never arrived, not as a decoration for Grant's performance, but after the room had finally learned the difference between being hosted and being held. Evelyn rose from the far end of the table with the quiet grace of a woman who had already survived the worst part of the evening without letting it teach her cruelty. The black dress fell simply around her knees. The candlelight touched the edge of her face, catching the tears she had refused to give the room when it was still laughing in Sienna's direction. Grant looked up as if he expected her to speak to him first, to argue, to forgive, to give him something he could use to feel central again. Evelyn gave him only a calm glance. You wanted a clean ending, she said. Now you have one. The words were not sharp. That made them harder to escape. Sienna sat beside him with her hands folded around the gold pin she no longer seemed proud to hold. Her champagne-colored dress still shimmered beneath the warm lights, but the glow had lost its power. She had signed a bill thinking it purchased a place. Instead, it had revealed that she had been seated inside another woman's mercy. Julian Moreau stepped closer, the cream envelope still resting beside the closed bill folder. Mrs. Whitaker, he said softly, the restaurant will take care of the evening. Evelyn shook her head once. No, she said. Let the amount stand. Grant's expression changed, cautious now. Evelyn. She did not look at him. She looked at Julian. Transfer the same amount to Harper Table Foundation tomorrow morning. Mark it for the Queen's Supper program. Families should eat well because of this room tonight. A stillness followed, different from the earlier silence. This one had warmth in it. The woman near the center of the table lowered her eyes, ashamed, and moved at once. One of Grant's partners pushed his chair back slightly, as if distance could separate him from what he had allowed himself to witness. Julian bowed his head, and this time it was not only respect. It was gratitude returning to its proper place. Your mother would have liked that, he said. Evelyn touched the Moreau crest on the folded napkin one final time, then placed it neatly beside her plate. She reached for nothing else. Not the ring she had already removed weeks ago. Not Grant's apology, which had not come and would have arrived too late if it had. Not the attention of the guests, which felt smaller now than the sound of her own breath. She walked past Sienna without slowing. Sienna did not speak. Perhaps there was nothing left to say once the woman she tried to replace had turned humiliation into dinner for strangers. Grant stood when Evelyn reached his chair. "We should talk," he said, low enough for dignity and loud enough for witnesses. Evelyn paused beside him, close enough to remember the man she had once taught how to thank a waiter, far enough to feel the freedom of no longer needing him to understand what he had lost. "Talk to your reflection first," she said. Then she walked toward the arched doorway, where the kitchen staff stood in quiet respect. Julian signaled with one hand, and the waiters entered at last, carrying lemon tarts on white porcelain plates, each one bright with citrus, powdered sugar, and a single mint leaf. They placed the desserts before the guests, but the final plate went to the empty seat where Evelyn had been sitting. No one touched it. Outside, Manhattan moved beneath winter light, indifferent and alive. Evelyn stepped onto the sidewalk, the cold air lifting the heat from her face. Behind her, in a room of candles, money, and silence, Grant remained at the table with the woman who had signed the wrong bill. Evelyn did not look back. She had not won the marriage. She had won herself, and that was the only ending worth paying for.